Hi, my name is Pelle and I'm a developer of this program called Waveform Generator. As the name suggests, it's a program for generating waveforms, or more specific, single cycle waveforms. Traditional analog synthesizers allowed you to create a few basic waveforms that was repeated over and over. And this software allows you to generate those waveforms based on math, and they can be exported to WAV files that you can import into your sampler or your synthesizer. Here is a close-up from the manual, and it shows such a single cycle waveform. In this case, it's a sine. All the waveforms generated in this program have a phase from 0 to 2 pi, or if you prefer it in degrees, from 0 degree to 360 degrees. And in this phase, the waveform will go through a full cycle. The output of the waveform functions will be values in the range from -1 to +1. So, for example, if you feed a sine waveform with 90 degrees, sine of 90 degrees will output the value 1. Likewise, inputting 180 degrees, the output would be 0, and so on. And this simple structure makes you generate waveforms. Here we have the main form of the program. It contains a tree view into which it shows all the waveforms that you have created. These waveforms are stored in a database. As you can see, some of these icons have different colors. The yellowish is a folder. The blue is an advanced waveform. And this orange one is a compound waveform. And the program also lets you create a partial waveform. And these are 3 different levels of complexity, where the advanced waveform is the most basic of these 3. The partial is a little more complex, and the compound is a lot more complex. For example, here you see a compound waveform. It consists of 4 partials. And here we see the traditional waveforms that you would most likely find in, if not all, then most synthesizers. They are able to produce a sine, a triangle, a square, or sometimes also called a pulse, and a saw. When you create a waveform with this program, you can right-click the tree view, and here I right-click a waveform so I can see add a sibling, and I choose an advanced waveform. When you open this form, you see the components that makes up an advanced waveform. First of all, you have a basic waveform, for example, a sine. And as I showed before, to produce this sine, you feed it with a lot of phase values, and for each phase value you get a value from -1 to +1, and based on this you can draw the sine waveform. But the advanced waveform have 3 phase converters that are able to convert or change the phase. For example, we can invert the phase to have it in reverse order. We can compress it, and so on. Likewise, we have value converters that when we output values from this sine function, we can change those values. And for that, we use the value converters. For example, we can use a volume and change the volume to lower the volume of that output, or we can have fade in the beginning of the waveform with different types, and so on. So an advanced waveform is simply a waveform, these 3 phase converters, and these 3 value converters. And for most of these you have 1 or 2 variants. For example, here this is the only one that's a true sine, but you have some different methods. It's not sines, but I still feel the same family. So even though you have relative few waveforms to choose from, you in reality have 1,000 of them, because you have multiple variants to change. And some of these, instead of variants, they have an edit button that simply opens a form where you can do more things. The next level of complexity is the partial waveform. And here you see the exact same controls. For example, we can choose a sine, we can choose a triangle, and then we have a split section. Right now we see 100% of the sine, but we can change this. For example, set it to 50%. Then the first 50 is the sine and the last are the triangle. And like each of these have their 3 phase converters, the 3 value converters, the split section also have these. And then the last level of complexity is the compound waveform, where we can, for example, choose a sine, and we can choose a saw, and then we have an operation that manipulates these two. Right now it's to left, so we see the left of these two, and that's the sine. But for example, we can choose a mix, and we can dial in a percentage. So now we are mixing these two together, and we have 2 more operators and 2 more partials, so we can make it even more complex. And again, we have our 3 phase converters and our 3 value converters. The program comes with a full manual that we saw here. And let's look at some illustrations that show how these waveforms are functioning. Here we see an illustration of how a basic waveform is working. The basic waveform is simply a function. You input the phase, and internally the program operates in radians, but you can think of it in degrees instead. So the phase is a value from 0 degree to 360 degrees. That phase you input to the function, and it outputs a value in the range from -1 to +1. And here we see a close-up of the advanced waveform. As I said, the advanced waveforms have 3 phase converters and 3 value converters. So what you actually is doing is you're inputting a phase to the first phase converter. Again, the phase is a value from 0 degree to 360 degree. And the phase converter changes that phase, pass that changed on to the next phase converter, that pass it on to the third. And then that output phase is what that's actually put into the waveform function, for example, the sine. That sine output value is in the range from -1 to +1, and that value is passed on to the first value converter, then to the next value converter, and then to the third value converter, and then it's finally output, and that's this output value that's used to draw the waveform. As I said, the interface of the program is made as a tree view. And the reason I decided to do that is because when you output the files, you will be saving them to disk, and it can retain this structure. For example, if I right-click the top one and choose export, I choose a folder where to export it, I choose a format, and so on. But when if I were to export this one, it will actually create a folder. It would export these as WAV files to this folder, but then it would create a basic subfolder. In that subfolder, it would place this file. Then it would create these 3 subfolders, and in these 3 subfolders, it would export these files. So that's the reason when you name these folders, you can, for example, if I want to add a folder here, I already have one called saw, So if I try to make a new one, I'm told I cannot have two with the same name. So I would have to call this something else. And that's because when you export it, of course, you cannot have two subfolders in the same folder with the same name. Likewise, in the same folder, you cannot have two files with the same name. When you right-click a folder, you see this context menu. And a lot of operations you can do using the keyboard also. It's shown here in the parentheses, which functions that are available for you. For example, using arrow up and down, I can navigate the tree. Using the left arrow, I can close a folder. Using the right arrow, I can open it. For example, if I want to rename this one, I can press F2. I can give the folder a new name. I can enter a description. If I have a description, it's shown up here. For example, let's add a description here. So now we see that description. We see a small info here. It's in this case, it's a folder, so I'm told how many waveforms and how many subfolders I have. Choosing a waveform, I can see who is the author of that waveform. In this case, it's a compound waveforms, so I can see the 4 waveforms that can make up this one. For example, choosing this one, I can see it's a hand-drawn waveform. So a lot of the navigation you can do from the keyboard. For example, at these siblings, you can press Control A for advanced, Control P for partial, Control C for compound. You can clone a waveform that makes an exact same copy, and doing so, it simply asks for the name of that waveform, and then I have an exact copy I can do something with. You can also convert it. For example, this one, I can choose to resample it into a hand-drawn or resample into a basic or advanced additive. All of these I will talk about in a future video. I can convert it if I made this one original. It's probably more likely the other way around. If I make this one as an advanced, but I need the more advanced features from a partial or compound, I can convert it. And lastly, I can export it to a file. When I export it, I have 3 presets, and I have a custom one that shows what it did the last time I exported. When you choose a custom one, a preset, all the fields are locked. You cannot change anything. But if I switch back to the custom, I can change it. You don't enter the name of the waveform to be exported because it will use the name you have given it here. But you can add a prefix that's added in front of the name, or a suffix that's added after the name. You can choose the file format. These 3 are special formats you cannot use in your synthesizer. It's described in the manual, its purpose. And then you have wav-files in the range from 41.1 kilohertz up to 96 kilohertz, and you have them in 16 and 24 bits. You can choose the number of samples for each file. You can choose if to dither the file or not, and you can choose to normalize it, so the volume of the file will always be set when you export it. In the file menu, you have the settings menu. Here you have some basic settings. You have the database. If you have more, you can choose which one to use. When you install the program, it will install this database, and it will be the default one. You can choose your audio interface. You can test your audio interface with a simple assign. And you have some different settings here. And the 3 presets I mentioned before. when you export a file, you cannot change the preset, but you can change the preset here. So, for example, you can have wave files with a different number of samples and different qualities. You can export to different folders if you have folders for your favorite soft or hardware synthesizers to export to. So here you can set up those three formats. And as we showed before, also the manual, it's I've written a full, if I recall correct, 170-page manual. And it starts by explaining the overview, and then I go through all the basic waveforms, all of the phase converters, all of the value converters, and lastly I explain more in depth the advanced, the partial and compound waveforms, and regarding the compound waveforms, all of its operators. So this manual is this manual is available all of the time. Also in the help menu you find a description of the open source libraries in use. I have this text file regarding the license of this software, and for those of you who consider donating if you like it, you'll find a link here also. And the about box telling just the overview of the program, and again a donate button that takes directly to the donate page. And otherwise, if you want to create more databases, you can simply enter a name here and set create. I have a few here. For example, this one is my personal database. As you can see here, it have almost 26,000 waveforms, and I have categorized it. For example, this one, it's not LFO, but it would be waveforms I would like to use for an LFO. Right now, the software can only export to wav-files, but if I find some way to export it to a format that I can bring into my DAW and use as automation, these waveforms would be great for that purpose. So that's the overall of the program. In the next video, I will go through start explaining the basic waveforms.